Hi friends, well it's been a lovely day today because it's rained and we haven't had rain for quite a while in Tasmania. And today I just wanted to change the pace a little bit and talk about why people who are vegan, who reject the exploitation of animals for meat, dairy, eggs, etc., and for clothing, for entertainment and other reasons, why they should be, or why we should be anti-war and anti-imperialist. If you follow my channel at all, you will probably know that I do a number of different subjects, a number of different issues, and one of them in particular is veganism. And if I'm not doing that specifically about veganism, an episode, I'm doing it, interspersing it, sort of connecting it with anti-war and anti-imperialism. It doesn't mean that veganism is an umbrella for all these issues. It just means that it's very, very connected to these issues. And I guess you could almost say, according to Donald Watson, who was the person who coined the term veganism in 1944. He lived in England, and he died in 2005 at the age of 95. And that was actually the year that I became vegan. I became vegan earlier in the year, and he died later in the year. Well, Donald Watson actually said that we should try and expand the sort of the idea of veganism, sort of encompass, not necessarily make veganism the umbrella for a whole bunch of issues, but we should expand our ideas of nonviolence. Now, I don't really know what he means, but I know that nonviolence, if we are to try and be nonviolent, we have to live nonviolently. You know that saying, peace is the way, the way, being peace is the way to peace. So the way the way to peace, I guess, firstly is to become vegan. The way to be nonviolent is to be vegan, because that's basically a basic step, really, isn't it, in a way? If we truly claim to care about other animals on the planet, then we can't selectively choose which ones we want to care about, and the others can just go to hell. But unfortunately, we have been indoctrinated to believe that the animals that we fetishize, like dogs, cats, and koalas, and whales, and dolphins, tigers, lions, that they're animals that we should care about, probably mostly because we like to look at them. So they're, in some ways, part of that motivation is for entertainment. But then we sort of think that the other animals, like the ones that are on our plates, on our backs, the ones for entertainment, the ones that we use for other reasons, any other reason, that they're not really as morally important. We don't even though we probably realize they're sentient, we kind of just, it's like there for looking at because we like to look at them. And then these other ones we eat, wear, and use, they're just to be used as resources. The thing is, there's no difference in sentience, so we're sort of arbitrarily deciding who can live and who can die, who we're going to protect, in quotes, and so forth. That's kind of a bit messed up, but it's not surprising that we have that way of being. It's not surprising we think that way, because here's Alia in the background, she's wearing a Bird Be Safe collar. No, we don't like to dress up our cats. It's not surprising that we think that way, because we've been indoctrinated that way right from birth, and all our relatives and friends and the children we played with in the schoolyard, all of that, they all in many ways keep us in line with that way of thinking. It's like if you were born into a we're all born into a racist situation because white supremacy is alive and well, but it's like when you're born into into this world. There's subtle ways and not so subtle ways that we're indoctrinated about other groups, other races. And it's very kind of relentless, and it's done on many levels with media and with what our friends and family say to us, what our teachers, what they teach us and what they don't teach us, because history is always written by the victor, by the oligarchy, and things are left out and things are written distorted and so forth. And that's the same, really, with how we're raised when it comes to non-human animals. We're indoctrinated right from birth 1 minute we're being read nursery rhymes about sweet little animals, and we're going, oh, isn't that lovely? And our mother's going, and mother or father or our parent is going, they're going, isn't this a lovely story about these lovely animals, and they have names and everything. They don't have they don't have branding numbers or anything. They have names. So in these stories they're given names, but in real life these same animals are on farms, no matter if they're happy animal farms, which doesn't exist because they all end up in the same slaughterhouse. They're all killed when they're non-productive. Their children are taken from them. But these animals in these books that we're read when we're young, they all have these sweet little names, and we think they're great, and there's pretty little pictures that we're read, that we're shown. Our parent shows us when we're growing up, if we're lucky. If we're lucky, meaning if we have parents that care about us. So that sort of indoctrination takes place. And then, of course, at the same time, when we're children, we're fed animal products every day, and these are the same animals that we're reading about in these nursery rhymes and in these children's books. So it's kind of very messed up, and eventually when we're adults, by the time we're adults, we well and truly see all these animals. Right, from earlier on, we see all these animals, that they're here for us. I mean, right up until the time that it dawned on me what I was doing. And that was when I read online the real information about what really happens in the dairy industry. That's the normal functioning of the dairy industry. I really, even though I would have said that I love animals, love in quotes, and I would, sort of jump like a bodyguard in front of some animal if somebody was going to hurt them. I mean, it was like that. I really cared about them. And I would rescue if I saw an animal in trouble or whatever, or intervene if somebody was trying to hurt them, or whatever that is, or whatever happened. And yet, at the same time, I was, and then I'd go home and I'd eat animal products, dairy, eggs, meat, etc. This moral compartmentalization. So, I was doing that right up until it dawned on me what I was doing. That's how dangerous and how heavy indoctrination is. Discriminations, all the forms of discrimination are just faces of the same ignorance. They otherize a sentient being based on an irrelevant criterion. In the case of animals, it's species, and then we make them targets of violence in one way or another. So now there's 1 trillion plus 1 to 3 trillion animals every year are tortured and killed for trivial reasons of mostly palate pleasure. Since we don't need animal products at all to survive, we can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources. So the only reason we're doing this killing of these 1 trillion land and aquatic animals every year plus is because we think they taste good. And on top of that, animal agriculture in all its forms is destroying the planet. It's one of the major drivers of the climate crisis. That's the other inconvenient truth. Anyway, I'm getting off the track here. I'm trying to make a point, though, how we're indoctrinated and how easy it is to basically not think that animal use, our animal exploitation, which we are participating in if we're not vegan, how that it's easy to separate that from what we're doing to brown and black people overseas in the name of spreading democracy and that kind of thing. This indoctrination that a lot of white people have, that other countries that are not like us, other people that are not like us, are in some ways primitive or savage in some ways, or incapable of looking after themselves in their own country, and hence that's why we're told that's the implied thing is that's why they need to be refugees and come to us, as if we don't have anything, as if these people come out of a vacuum, out of nowhere. This is sort of a convenient thing that we believe in. It's not even a conscious thing for a lot of people. We're so indoctrinated in the West that all these refugees are basically just coming from these underdeveloped countries, and they're kind of, they can't look after themselves and so forth. This is something we're relentlessly indoctrinated, right from, when the mainstream media does it. So, that's a discrimination, it's a sort of a racist, white supremacist thing that we're indoctrinated into. This is I'm speaking now specifically to Westerners. This is another example of targeting a group based on an irrelevant criterion, in this case, race. And sometimes it's based on a religion, like Muslims. There's, sort of a lot of propaganda around Muslims today, Islamophobia, which is causing them to be a target of violence, not only for imperialist wars, and that's intentional to make them a target of violence so we can then go and invade their country, like what we're trying to do with Iran at the moment. But, that's been ongoing. And then there'll be another country like China. There'll be a lot of anti-Chinese propaganda, and the next thing, there'll be a war on China because China is a threat economically to the US, and the US likes capitalism as long as they're winning, as long as there's no real competition. And when there's real competition like China, and China's surpassing them, then that's when it's not okay. That's when competition's not okay, and that's when the US wants to crush China. And it goes like that. So, but, these have all got, they all have similarities. I'm sure you can see that, right? And that's why, if we're vegan, we need to firstly abandon mainstream media, because that's owned by corporations. And corporations have no loyalty to anybody or any country. They have loyalty to themselves. They have loyalty to their shareholders, and they don't care if there's an ecocide on the planet. So a lot of mainstream media has been for a long time. They've been suppressing news about the climate, spending about 3 minutes a year or something on the climate change. I call it climate crisis now. And that's intentional, because they didn't want people to be thinking about that issue. And they're still trying to do it, like the Murdoch press. There are some that are starting to see that it's maybe going to impact their business. It's going to impact everything. So anybody with any sense should be doing something about it. I mean, there's no jobs on a dead planet, as that saying goes. There's not going to be any food. You're not going to be able to keep animal agriculture going. If you that's coming to an end by 2050. It won't be able to feed the planet. So many resources go into keeping animal agriculture going, and so many subsidies and everything. And on top of that, there are a tremendous drain on water resources and land usage, and they're a tremendous contributor to the climate crisis and so forth. And of course, something that's always left out is that it's massive violence to sentient beings for absolutely no real reason, for trivial reasons. So anyway, we need to, as vegans, and I'm talking, if you're not vegan, and I hope you do become vegan and think about this issue, but if we're vegans, we really need to think about what we're doing, why we're compartmentalizing. We're all animals, non-human animals are so important, and yet we don't think about what's happening to humans, to brown and black people overseas in these countries like the Middle East, where we're bombing them and destroying their countries. And the reason, sometimes the reason is because we're only following mainstream media. And as I said, they have interests in these wars. They have advertising from weapons manufacturers like Lockheed Martin and Northrop and all of that, or they're shareholders in weapons manufacturers, or they are the weapons manufacturers. So they have no interest in, they have an interest in war continuing. And that's why, of course, now there's a few reasons why Iran is a target. And I'm not going to go into it here, and I've posted a few videos on that, and you can look at the Grey Zone, grayzone.com, thegrayzone.com, to find out more about that, or Media Roots Radio. So I'm not going to go into that here, but there's a few reasons why Iran is now a target. And, if we're not pushing back on that, if we're not trying to spread independent news about what's really happening, for why this is happening for Iran, if we don't sort of understand that the mainstream media is corporate owned and they're actually feeding us a lot of lies, and have been for a very long time, then we're just as propagandized about these countries as people are propagandized about animals and how they're here for us to use. That's how people become a target of violence. That's how non-human animals become a target of violence. You see the connection here? So that's why I focus on, even though I focus on a few issues on this channel, Taint Signals from Vega, I try to make the connections every so often. And if I try to do that when I'm talking about anti-war and anti-imperialism, I can make a connection with how it's important, if we want to have a non-violent, just world, that we become vegan first. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can be anti-war, anti-imperialist, and be vegan. And we can also do non-violent civil disobedience to shake up this whole thing about the lack of the lack of movement by governments on the climate crisis. And I've got my thoughts on that too, and I'm not going to go into it here. I don't want this to become a long video, which it could if I went into that. But I've done in numerous videos. There's a playlist, Veganism and Anthropogenic Climate Change, Climate Crisis, and you'll see that in the playlist. You'll be able to check out what my thoughts are on that. So anyway, so why should vegans be anti-imperialist and anti-war? Because there is so much carnage and so much destruction with US imperialism and the Western allies that go along with it, my country included, Australia. There's so much carnage towards brown and black people overseas that it's sort of we're basically destroying their countries and vilifying them, and it's not even about at this point in time now, because the US actually has caught up with it's not really so much seeking out oil anymore. It just wants to destroy. I mean, that's fine because they don't want any competition for oil, but it's actually at this point just because they want to destroy. The US wants to destroy these countries, basically. I might even play you a little excerpt I saw the other day from the Empire Files, and it sort of talks about that in relation to Iran. Just a brief little excerpt.
Is that things have changed fairly recently with regard to the U.S.'s designs on other people's oil. So for a long time, for example, Jimmy Carter announced what is known as the Carter Doctrine, that if any country would interfere with the U.S.'s access to oil in the Persian Gulf, he announced the U.S. would have the right to militarily intervene to defend U.S.'s access to oil. Well, the truth is the U.S. doesn't need any access to anyone's oil now. The U.S. is a net exporter of both oil and natural gas. Because we found more oil, we're willing to drill more. That's particularly under Trump. I guess we're now willing to drill more in Alaska, for example, and because of fracking. The point being, we don't need Iranian oil, nor do we need Venezuelan oil. And so I think while the U.S. would like compliant states in countries like Iran and Venezuela so that U.S. companies could profit from their oil, a second best scenario from the U.S. point of view is to simply knock them off as competitors, simply prevent them from producing any oil at all. And that would allow the U.S. to gain more profit, of course, from the sale of the oil and natural gas. And so I think what people need to realize is the U.S. would be just as happy to destroy those countries as it would to control them. And we see this more and more over the years. We see this with the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, particularly Libya, where the U.S. seems simply content to wreck a state and walk away from it and to get rid of competitors that way, which is a pretty nefarious goal.
So it's basically about destroying countries at this point. It's not even about the competition for resources. So that sounds very nefarious and awful, but at this point in time, having followed independent news for a long time, that's how I see it too. You know, I used to say it was for resources, but now I don't think it's so much even that. It's kind of like just a white supremacist wanting to stamp out and destroy other, and also just rule the world basically by any means necessary. Now, if you don't follow independent news at all, you're going to think I'm probably going to sound very conspiratorial, and that's where really I know you might think that, but it's actually not the case. I mean, if we follow mainstream news, then we're totally propagandized at this point, totally. Just as history books in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and probably even now, written by the victors, and they're actually edited and facts omitted, and basically it all sounds very nice, and it's all about white people mainly, or it's all about men conquering different things, basically men conquering areas and killing and pillaging and so forth, as if that's some sort of that's been normalized in a lot of history. Most people that are written about in history books are actually criminals. They're war criminals. And it's no different now. What's going on with the U.S. empire? They're all war criminals, and it doesn't matter what, for example, what U.S. Main party like the Democratic Party or the GOP, it doesn't matter who's in. They're war criminals. The President of the United States is a war criminal, and a lot of their support, the people who make decisions for them, for example, Mike Pompeo and people like that. So anyway, I'm getting off the track. So that's really all I'm going to say, is that if we want to, because we're vegan and we reject the use, the exploitation and killing of the vulnerable, that being the largest group on the planet, non-human animals, the most invisible group, if we reject that and truly reject it, and I'm not talking about vegans that that have speciesist positions and they promote this idea of it's morally acceptable to exploit animals as long as it's done humanely. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about vegans that reject animal exploitation. Sorry, there's some little birds. I'm keeping an eye on this little guy here. So I'm not talking about that sort of speciesist position that, you know, some vegans have. I'm talking about rejecting it. So if we reject exploitation of the vulnerable, then we should reject exploitation and killing and destroying of the vulnerable human beings on the planet, whose only, you know, the only reason that's happening is because there's no real good reason. It's just because of white supremacy and racist positions and so forth. So, you know, we have to stop compartmentalizing, and it's so dire now, the way U.S. imperialism is. It's so dire that literally there's like 7 or 8 countries plus that are being meddled with. There's all sorts of horrific things going on via U.S. imperialism. And there's so many people have died now, and so many people are starving because of it. In Venezuela alone, for example, economic sanctions are an act of war, and the U.S. has put crippling economic sanctions on Venezuela, and 40,000 Venezuelans since 2017 have died due to these crippling U.S. sanctions. That's just one example of many I can give you. They're doing that now to Iran, crippling sanctions because they want Iran to submit, and they want to be able to just take over, take their oil, destroy the country. I wouldn't even be surprised if they use these so-called tactical nukes, these nuclear weapons, these limited range in quotes, nuclear weapons on them, just for the sake of trying them out on a country. So this is the level of depravity now we have with the U.S. imperialism. And that's why as vegans, we need to, and it doesn't matter what country you live in, because this is a global thing, and we need to be internationalists. It doesn't matter what country you're in, we need to care about this issue. As vegans, we need to care about it. If you're not vegan, you need to care about it. But I'm just talking about vegans that have these sort of blinkers on, basically, and they don't think about anything else but non-human animals. That is a mistake, and it's also not right. It's not right to only be caring about non-human animals. That becomes its own problem. Do you know what I'm saying? We can still be doing lots of things to address, to do vegan education. We can be doing a lot of things for that, but we also we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can also push for an anti-war, anti-imperialist position, and we can share independent journalism like the Grey Zone and the Empire Files, and I'll leave a few links to some ones that you can follow if you're not aware of this. And please don't write this off as, oh, she's some sort of conspiratorialist nutter. Sorry, but I mean, it sounds like that sometimes. When you're so propagandized, when you hear the truth, it sounds like like that saying goes, it sounds like you're from Mars or something, you know, that you're speaking another language. That's how scary and how far gone the propaganda is now. So I implore you to please make the connection between veganism and anti-war and anti-imperialism. And it's easy to be vegan, it really is. It's not expensive. I mean, lots of poorer countries have been eating plant-based diets forever, and that's why, because it's cheap. Beans and grains and leaf, you know, and so forth. I mean, that's why. So this nonsense that we need to be buying all these pre-made products and all that sort of stuff, that's a nonsense. We don't need to do that. I don't hardly ever buy any pre-made vegan products. They're too expensive. They're also often junk food. So please check out my vegan podcast, a comprehensive vegan podcast I've done, howtogovegan.org. Please check that out. And I'll also leave and check out the links I make in the vegan podcast, because they're actually really incredible and very informative. So do check that out, and let's walk and chew gum at the same time, because if we truly want a peaceful world, if we truly want peace, then we have to work towards peace, and we have to be peace. And that's not easy these days. It's never been easy, but it's something. It's a work in progress, isn't it? We can all try and do that. I try and do that, and I hope that. And I see so many people working for peace in various ways, and some are not vegan, and I think, well, that's kind of sad, and I that's why I'm trying to reach people that are really, really committed to nonviolence and justice, to really include non-human animals in their concern, in their regard, because it's essential, basically. Being vegan is a first step to a nonviolent life. Thank you so much for watching. Please click the like button if you like the content. Please hit the notifications bell, otherwise you don't receive notifications when I drop a video. And subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Go vegan. Peace.